The morning of my wedding was supposed to be joyful, but as the preparations buzzed around me, my phone call to Oliver cast a dark shadow. I was anxious. He was late. "Where are you?" I demanded when he picked up. "You're late." There was a pause on the other end before he answered. I'm with Lucy. She's in the hospital." The name struck me like a lightning bolt. His first love, who I thought had vanished from his life long ago. "You can't stay there, Oliver. I need you here. At our wedding now." My voice shook, barely able to mask the panic. Our families had poured so much into this day. Oliver's grandfather had saved mine in the war, forging a bond that carried through generations. Our families were intertwined, and Oliver and I had grown up together, naturally slipping into the expectation of marriage. I wasn't sure how much of it was love and how much was comfort, but there was respect between us, or so I thought. But his reply came cold, distant. "I can't leave her. She needs me. I need you too." I cried, desperation rising. But then he hit me with the final blow. "She's pregnant, with my baby." His voice held no remorse, just a statement of fact. The silence stretched, and when he finally spoke again, it was with an unnerving casualness. "Just wait patiently. I'll be there in 2 hours. It's not like you're going to find a new husband in that time. Don't worry, I'll marry you as our families expect." I hung up and crumpled to the floor, the weight of betrayal crashing down. I wasn't crying because I loved him deeply. I wasn't sure I ever had, but because he had shattered my trust. As his words echoed in my mind, something sparked. "It's not like you can find a new husband in 2 hours. Well, maybe I could." I rose, wiping the tears away, and went out of the room. Henry was in the corner of the reception hall, watching the chaos of preparations without a groom with his usual calm. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had a quiet, commanding presence that was impossible to ignore. His dark hair was always perfectly in place, his strong jawline accentuated by just the slightest hint of stubble, giving him a rugged yet refined look. But it was his eyes, piercing blue, soft whenever they landed on me, that always made my breath catch. He was effortlessly handsome, the kind of man who drew attention without trying. I saw him and walked up to him, my decision already made, and blurted out, "Would you marry me?" My voice was steadier than I felt. Henry's gaze flickered with surprise. We can write a contract. It doesn't have to be a real marriage." I quickly added. Henry's charming blue eyes staring at me, and then his lips curled into a small, unreadable smile. After a long moment he nodded. "All right." And just like that, the course of my life shifted. When the guests learned that I was marrying Henry instead of Oliver, shock rippled through the room. I stood there holding my head high. "Today, I'm marrying the man who supports and cares about me," I announced, "not the one who cheated and betrayed my trust." There was a murmur and then silence. Our families, understanding the weight of my words, accepted the change. Oliver arrived, furious to find himself no longer the groom, but before he could lay the blame at my feet, Henry stepped up, shielding me with a quiet firmness that left no room for argument. After the wedding was over, I sold the apartment that our families had helped Oliver and I set up, and moved into Henry's place. It is a spacious house. We agreed to keep things simple, 2 separate bedrooms, a partnership in name only, just to satisfy the expectations of those who mattered to us. At first, it felt like living with a stranger. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. Henry was careful not to intrude. He never pushed me for more than I was ready to give, but he was there. Always there, in a quiet, reassuring way. The first time I noticed how much he genuinely cared was a few days after we moved in. I had spent hours unpacking, and when I was done I felt completely drained. Without a word, Henry appeared at the doorway of my room with a mug of hot tea, exactly the way I liked it, with just a splash of milk and a hint of honey. "You look like you could use a break," he said, his voice gentle, offering the steaming cup. I accepted it, my fingers brushing against his. For the first time I saw a hint of concern in those blue eyes, and something fluttered in my chest. Small gestures became his language. On rainy evenings he'd come home with an umbrella for me if I'd forgotten mine, the smell of fresh rain and his warmth filling the hallway as he handed it over. In the mornings he'd make extra coffee and leave a cup on the counter, even if I hadn't asked. He'd listen, really listen when I talked about my day, offering quiet insights or simply giving me his full attention. One evening, after a long and frustrating day, I came home to find my favorite book waiting for me on the living room couch. It was Henry's Way, thoughtful and understated. Gradually I found myself drawn to him. I started looking forward to our evenings together, when we'd cook side by side in the kitchen. He was surprisingly good at making me laugh. His humor was dry and unexpected, catching me off guard in the best way. He'd tease me lightly when I got flustered trying to follow a complicated recipe, his smile warm and genuine, and I realized how much I loved seeing that rare, genuine smile. One night as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I dozed off halfway through, only to wake up hours later, my head resting on his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't try to wake me. Instead, his arm was around me, holding me steady, and there was a blanket draped over us both. I didn't pull away. I just stayed there, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, listening to the quiet of the house. It was the safest I'd felt in a long time. It was the little things that did it. How he always seemed to know when I needed comfort without asking, how he remembered the smallest details about my likes and dislikes, how he never judged me when I got overwhelmed or anxious. When I got sick with the flu, Henry took off work, staying by my side. He made soup, brought medicine, and patiently sat with me through restless nights, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. And when I mentioned offhandedly that I missed the garden I had growing up, he surprised me by transforming our small backyard into a little oasis. One Saturday I found him out there, up to his elbows in soil, planting roses and lavender because he remembered I'd once said they were my favorites. Our conversations deepened. We talk about anything and everything, books, movies, our hopes, and even our past. He shared his dreams of expanding his business, his regrets about choices he'd made, and his fears. I found myself opening up too, sharing my own insecurities and desires. One night, as we sat on the back porch under a blanket of stars, I looked over at him. This man who had started as a stranger, a convenient choice, and realized that he had become the person I trusted most in the world. It wasn't a grand, sudden moment of falling in love. It was slow, steady, and certain, like the blooming of a flower I hadn't noticed until it was fully open. I didn't realize how deeply I cared for him until one evening, when I found myself waiting for him to come home, a flutter of excitement in my chest just to see his smile. The turning point came one chilly autumn night. We were bundled up in coats, walking through the local park, the crunch of fallen leaves under our feet. I stopped him suddenly, my heart racing. "Henry, thank you for everything," I said, my voice catching. He looked down at me, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time I reached out and took his hand. His fingers tightened around mine and he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made my heart skip. From that moment on, everything felt different. We weren't pretending anymore, and what had begun as a contract turned into something real, something true. Henry and I, once just a practical arrangement, became a true partnership, a real marriage built on trust, kindness, and a love that had grown stronger with every small gesture, every shared moment, every unspoken understanding. Meanwhile, the truth about Lucy's baby came out. It wasn't Oliver's child after all. He was left to grapple with his choices alone. I almost wanted to thank Oliver for not marrying me so that I found the man who truly loves me, and who had stood by my side when I needed him most.